Today we're going to talk about Jiu-Jitsu 101. It's like, what is that? Well, it's kind of the basic rules of the do's and don'ts of certain positions. Okay, so of course I'm not showing any technique on here, but I'm going to give you some concepts and ideas that, especially if you're new, you should apply that to your Jiu-Jitsu in different positions. The thing that this came about was somebody new in the school, one of the purple belts that ended up going somewhere else anyway, who was just a wrestler. The kid was like, he's like, let me show you some positions. So he was like, yeah, if somebody's mounted on you, you go for a choke, you do this, you that. It's like certain things were just like, wow, how do you not notice as a purple belt when I knew this after training for just 2 or 3 weeks as a white belt? So there's certain things that are just basic do's and don'ts in certain positions in the beginning. Once you start to get good, then you could start to break the rules and do whatever you want. But as a true beginner, certain things should be a certain way, and certain things really don't change as you start to get better. You might do stuff to bait somebody, but that's a totally different thing. So the first thing I'll talk about really quickly is when you are mounted, okay? What don't you do when you're mounted? When somebody's mounted and they're straddled across your hips, the last thing you should be doing is lifting your arms up, because as you lift your arms up, that person's knees are going to slide up to your chest, and it's going to be that much harder to get them off with any moves, because once they're riding your chest, your hips will not help you with a lot of the escapes that were meant for that. Okay, also, when somebody's mounted on you, the first thing you want to try to do is protect your neck and your arms. So if the person's starting to go for some type of choke, you could defend it, and then you could block that arm. So if, say, he's reaching across with this arm, I could block it, and then I could do the upa that way, right? Also, if you're starting to push the person, in jiu-jitsu, they love that, right? If you're pushing them, they could go for an arm bar. And the number one thing you don't do when somebody's mounted is you don't go for a choke on them. Anytime you're extending your arm to reach for their collar, you're giving them your arm. So the simple rules is when somebody's mounted on you, you want to keep your elbows close to your body so you can defend your neck, and you're not extending your arm. You should never at any time be pushing them away, because you're extending your arm. Plus, when you start to push them, you're straightening out the arm where they could start to slide up, and now it makes it much more difficult for you to escape. And you're making it miserable for yourself, because you're giving them a position now that you have to try to get back. So that's why with people who don't know jiu-jitsu, they start to do that because they want to bench press you or push you off. This is a natural reflex. Remember, jiu-jitsu should not be against jiu-jitsu in the beginning. You should be learning stuff that goes against the average person, so it makes it easier for you to understand what's a natural reflex, so you can learn those moves to defeat that. That's why after doing jiu-jitsu for just a few months, you should have no problem against the average person in the street. But you have some people who are making up their own stuff, so as a beginner, you want to understand those things, so keep your elbows to your body so you could defend your neck, and then from there, wait till you could grab an arm, and then you could upa in that direction. But the last thing you should be doing is lifting your arms up, because a person will slide up, or extending your arms. So that's rule number one for when you are mounted by anybody. Okay, so the number one thing is you don't want to be pushing the person away. Number two is you want to keep your elbows close to the body. Why? Because then the person can't slide their knees up. Where does that position their hips? They're sitting on your waist. If they're sitting on your waist, now you could start to use bridging techniques, either reverse them or throw them off balance, or to pop them up for a second. So if your elbows are up and they're here, they're riding your chest. You want to keep your elbows down so you keep them on your hips. This helps you either do the upa, it helps you bridge, it helps you do the elbow escape. You want to keep your elbows close to the body. You don't want to protect your neck like this. If anything, you protect your neck like this. So get used to it. even if it's a fight, if your hands are up here, you're in trouble. You want to keep the person here. This is how you're going to be protecting yourself and throwing them off balance, because you're going to be able to bridge. So that's the second important thing. Keep your elbows in, and going back to number one is never push the person off of you. Now, since we're covering the mount, now say you're mounted on the person and they roll to their stomach. Now you have their back, right? So it's the back mount. First thing you should be trying to go for is trying to get the hooks in. Sometimes you can only get one in, right? So that's when the legs hook into the person's thighs. Also now, that should be number one priority, is trying to get the hooks, but where's your grip supposed to be? So the thing that you see, which you should never do, is going over the person's shoulders, right? Trying to just go for the choke. A lot of beginners do this. So right away, you should try to either establish some type of gable grip under their armpits and holding around their waist or their chest. So if they start to get on to their knees and stand up, you don't slide off of them and then fall, and then now they're on top. So you want to try to go for the hooks with the legs, and then right away grab underneath the armpits. Okay, another grip would be the seatbelt grip, right? One would be under the armpit and one would be over the shoulder. So you'd be like this on the person. You should never ever, when you're on the person's, when you got the back mount, is go over the person's shoulders trying to go for the choke right away. You know, you're gonna just slide off, and the person could defend and pull you off. So whenever you have the back mount, two positions for the arms is either under the armpits, or you got the seatbelt grip over one shoulder, under one armpit. This will stop you from sliding off the person, because most people are gonna start to do like a tripod and start, well, you know, quadruped, right? So their hands are on the floor, their feet are on the floor, and they start to lift their butt really high, so it creates a ramp for you to slide off. If you don't have the hooks, you're gonna start to get into a bad position with just the grip, but at least the grip could hold you to regain the hooks. But if you're grabbing around the neck and you don't have the hooks, you're just gonna slide off. So when you have that back mount, the priority should be right away to grips, keep you from sliding off, and then getting those hooks in. Once the hooks are in and you know you're good, the hand that's over the shoulder could start to slide for a choke. But if both hands are over the shoulders, that person's gonna defend and start to pull and twist you off, okay? So that's the back mount. Here's a great example of control under the armpits, and then the seatbelt control, and then he puts the hooks in. This is how you get the rear mount and secure it. Another BJJ 101 is when you have somebody's back, you have the back mount, you want to keep the hooks in their thighs, or you could go for the body triangle. Never cross your ankles when your feet are around their waist, and this is why. Okay, so the next position would be cross side or side control. Some people call it side mount. I think that's completely old school and outdated at this point, right? I think side mount is more when you're mounted on the person and they turn to their side and then you're in a kneeling position. That's a side mount. So we're going to talk about cross side or side control. So when you're on top of the person, you should be learning the positions and the correct grips of where you should be, where your hands should be, alternating and stuff. The one thing that you shouldn't do that a person naturally does is go for a headlock. Okay, so say I'm laying across side and the person's on this side. Somebody doesn't know anything. It's like, oh, right away I'm gonna grab that person by the neck and hold them. Once you start to do that, you expose your back, your balance isn't good. They could easily roll you over the top, or they could come over the top and get your back, or they could start to frame and throw their legs around your neck and do a scissor choke with the legs. That's when the person extends their legs and puts pressure here. So if you're doing the soul stealer, of course, that's completely different. You know, if you have a judo position that you know what you're doing, that's a little different too, kesekatami, right? But it doesn't put you in a good position for really anything. Usually that's to hold the person to establish control, and then you're switching the arms. You're not staying in that position. You know, we're talking about jiu-jitsu, of course, right? We're not talking about judo or anything like that. So the headlock position is something that nobody should be going for when you establish cross-side. And when do you establish that? Either the person bumps you off from the mount and you're trying to regain control, or you just pass the legs by passing the guard or half guard. So as a beginner, in Jiu-Jitsu 101, you should stop going for headlocks. Right away, the teacher should teach you the positions of the hands to be when you're cross-side. But going for a headlock is a natural thing that somebody does that doesn't work against a Jiu-Jitsu practitioner. So that's an instinct, but Jiu-Jitsu is teaching you to go against that, so you're putting yourself in a good position to maintain the top position. Because you don't want to go right away, because the reason why most people go for a headlock is they think they're going to choke the person, right? You don't want to abandon everything going for so-called a submission. You want to go for position, then submission. Because then if the submission fails, you still have that position there available. Since we talked about the headlock, we'll kind of keep it on the same line. So now if you're in half guard and you're on top of the person, right? Half guard is 50-50 pretty much, where you have one leg between theirs and they have one leg between yours. So when you're in that top position, kind of the legs, right, are like this on each other, right? So same thing, when you're on top in the person's half guard, you don't want to go for a headlock either. It's that simple, because you're giving the person your back and you could easily be rolled over. All right, so the headlock is something you want to kind of abandon as a jiu-jitsu practitioner. If you end up there from a throw or something, which is normal because you might grab the arm and the head, once you hit the floor, you got to change the position of your arms. Okay, so that's another thing that applies to just half guard. And pretty much the last thing that I think I'll cover with this, so it's not a long video, is when you're in the person's guard. The same purple belt I was talking about earlier was telling the guy, oh yeah, when you're in the closed guard, that's when the person's legs are locked around your waist, right? Their ankles are crossed. When you're in the person's closed guard, you should not, he's like, oh yeah, when you're in the closed guard, go for the collar choke. Are you crazy? If you go for a collar choke in the person's guard, they're gonna armbar you. That should be Jiu-Jitsu 101. So what do you do when you're in the guard? Number one thing is trying to get posture, keeping your body up. If your head is down, you have to try to fight to get posture first. If you don't have posture, you can't do anything. So the number one goal in jiu-jitsu when you're in somebody's guard is trying to have good hand position. Some people go for the biceps, some people go on the hips, some people put one hand on the chest, one hand on the hips. Go for posture. This is the most important thing. You can stand up when you're bent over. If you are, that's when the sweeps and finishes come. Just watch any competition. Okay, so when you're in the guard, number one thing is trying to get posture and having your hands placed right where you can maintain that no matter what. Then from there, say the person opens the guard, you didn't even stand up. Now what do? Right? One method is you put one hand under the leg, you try to grab the collar, and then the other hand goes underneath the butt and you're trying to stack the person. So, looking at just this method alone, what's the basics from that? What's the important thing from that? When you're passing the guard, you might have an instance where you have one hand in and one hand out. So that means one hand between the legs and one hand behind the legs or close to the butt. You might be there for a second, but you don't want to be there too long. That's when the triangles come. If one arm's in, one's out, that person's going to throw their legs around your neck and your arm, and now you're going to be fighting to either breathe with the triangle or an arm bar or any other thing that comes along with that. So once the person's legs open up or you pry them apart or break them open, once you get one arm underneath, you want the other one right away, or at least controlling the knee. There's no way you should ever have one arm in and one arm out. Whenever you're in that position for too long, for more than even a second or two, you're vulnerable to a lot of submissions. So when you're passing the guard, either both hands are in, both hands are out, or one hand might be in and the other one's controlling the knee. But that might only last for so long because the person's gonna break that grip. You should right away break the habit of having one hand in, one hand out, because that's where all the submissions come. Here I'm not going to talk about turtle position because that's very complex for both people. But if you're in turtle position, the thing that you really want to do is try to close the space between your elbows and your thighs or your knees, so you don't create a big hole or a gap between those where it's easier for the person to right away put their leg in and go for at least one hook, but this is a very complex position, top or bottom. Okay, so for me to talk about that is kind of useless. So everything else that I covered is just the basics of Jiu-Jitsu 101. You should notice definitely within the first couple of weeks of training as a white belt. And if you don't, go back to the basics. I mean, this should be etched in stone within the basics and basic principles of Jiu-Jitsu, because this is super, super important. Also, when it comes to just the guard itself, right? Or any type of reversals or sweeps, one thing that you want for sure, for any type of sweep to work, you need one of the limbs caught, right? So think of a table or a chair with 4 legs. So now say if the table's here and you have one leg in the front in the left corner and you take it away, where is that weak? In that corner where the leg is missing. So think whenever you're going for a sweep or a reversal, you have to take away that arm or leg that's posting in that area and bring that person's weight into that area where they can't stop themselves from toppling over. All the sweeps and everything come from this concept, something super simple. Okay, so the stuff that I covered today is just basic concepts of Jiu-Jitsu 101. Everybody should know this. If you don't notice or understand it, try to look at the basic moves and see what the person's doing and try to realize how those concepts are applied. If somebody's a blue belt or a purple belt or above and doesn't know this, I don't know what they've been learning this whole time. But my whole thing is to help you think a little bit, so from there you could start to understand the concepts, so you can understand the fundamentals a little more deeply, and from there your jiu-jitsu could start to skyrocket because you know what you're doing now.